platform.
Okay. Well, it's 6 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, everybody. So welcome to week 4. We're all back. The room's all different, arranged, and everything. Gosh, look at all this. Well, we'll mix this all up in a little bit, but let's see here. So on the agenda for tonight, I want to talk about your project 4. This will be a little bit more of an in-depth discussion because well, we're kind of taking it to the next step, and there's a lot of sort of new things that you'll see here. So we'll do that in the first half of class. I'll walk through what the archetype gives you, good things like that. And then we'll spend the rest of the time working on another kata in pairs or mobs, and this time it's an RPN calculator. But first off, what questions do you have for me? How's project 2? Saw lots of good questions on the community. People feeling pretty good about it? All right, good deal. Yeah, question on project 2. Yeah.
So, is there, obviously there's a kind of big menagerie of ways of inputting and outputting. There are so many, the tree for instance, just readers is pretty, there's a lot of different, maybe different classes there. It seems like, do you know, is there some good resource as to where, it seems like each one is good for some particular thing, and it's hard to really decide.
Right, where do I know where to start?
I kind of narrowed, we're going to use some kind of reader because this is text-based, but then within that, there's a line number reader, there's an input stream reader, there's a file reader, and then there's, I don't know.
Okay. So your question is about, hey, there's this whole class hierarchy, a bunch of interfaces and stuff in the Java I/O package. How do I know which one is right for my problem? And do you have a related question?
No, I was just going to suggest that in the extent of our projects, the examples in the comments covers super great. It'll kind of show you how to
Did
set
you
it.
say later which part is in the comments or
I think there's a file I/O code file, and that one.
Okay, yeah, so he recommends using the cone to sort of understand more about the API. I of course, recommend the lecture material up on YouTube in the now immortal Core API Part 1 and 2 screencasts. That's another place. So that's what I think about this stuff. But there's also the Java docs. A good way to learn the API is sort of browse through the Java docs and start internalizing them, click around, and sort of figure out what all these things are. So you're thinking about the various, as a file reader, sorry. So all the different kinds of readers. And so you can read about them, and then you can browse to various different kinds. So a line number reader, what's this thing all about? You can look at its constructors to figure out the kinds of things that it takes. So line number reader is one of those readers that you wrap around another reader to get some information about it. And so then, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head when we were talking about, well, there's all these different kinds. How do you know when to use them? Well, hopefully the name is descriptive. Otherwise, for me, buffered reader always was confusing because buffered reader is the thing that gives you a read line method. Although there's also something called scanner, I think. No, I don't remember where that is. In utils, is that where scanner is? Element scanner. Yeah, this is the thing that, you create around system.in. Yeah, okay. Anyway, but there's also, stuff like this that you can use. So, I guess it's, in my mind, it's all part of familiarizing yourselves with the API. And this might be a little different from you guys, for you. While you've probably seen languages like Python and to a lesser degree C++ that have APIs, I don't know how much you've encouraged to use them. And so I'm guessing, so far, maybe earlier in your academic careers, it was more about learning the language and what you were taught and what you were assessed on. It was learning the language. That's really important, right? You gotta be, versant. But it's sort of one of those, it's like learning to speak or learning to write, where there is the, understanding the syntax, the punctuation and stuff is one thing, sentence structure is another, and then there's colloquialism, right? And so there's all these different pieces, parts to programming. One of which is the syntax of the language, and there's also the set of APIs that help you, do your work so you're not implementing it all yourself. Make sense? Is that helpful? I hope. Go off and read the Java docs. Feel like a dork, but it helps. Anyway. Other questions about projects 2 or 3? Yes?
So for project 2, are we allowed to use any API included in the JDK?
Yes, you can use any API in the JDK. I guess I'll put one provision on that. I do run your project 2 with the security manager enabled. And so I run your program within a sandbox because, I'm running your code on the creator's account and, there's sensitive stuff on there that I don't want your program to be able to access. And so I only give your program the ability to do certain things that I was expected to do, read and write to certain files, access certain system properties.
Secondary APIs like the W3C stuff.
Oh, yeah, you can use Dominate, right. So here again, I encourage you to use it. And if, but I am running it in a sandbox, and so then there might be a couple of funny runtime error things I might either have to adjust my security permissions for, or or if I really can't get it to work, I'll start a dialogue with you. But I encourage you to use the standard APIs. APIs, libraries that aren't dependencies in the Maven from the Maven archetype. You won't be able to use. So if you want to use JDOM or something like that, which is a third-party XML library, nope, you can't use that one. All right, good question. Anything else? Okay, awesome. We'll keep the questions coming on the forum. Let's talk about Project 4. Okay, so far, in the first 3 projects, we were learning about the Java language and how to do file I/O and sort of like figuring out how to develop in Java. In Project 4, we sort of focus less on Java and more about what you can do with it. In particular, writing web applications. So it's the year 2016. There's this new thing called the web, and you can use it to implement Pokemon Go. And so I'm sure cultural historians, when they listen to this recording on YouTube, they'll be like, oh yes, Pokemon Go, where it all started to fall. Okay. So in Project 4, you take your appointment book and you turn it, you take it from your command line application, which is just all one process, right? You start your main method, you just go there and you execute, and then you're done. Well, in Project 4, you now have a client-server application that has two processes that talk to each other. One is going to be the web server, which is a long-running process that you'll run something called a web container, and I'll talk about that in the next little while. And the other one is a Java command line tool, just like your projects 1, 2, and 3, but it interacts with your appointment book using an HTTP connection. So you've got two processes talking to each other. And I'll preface this by saying this is an order of magnitude more complex than your first 3 projects, just by its nature, right? Where project 1, 2, and 3, it was just like, okay, start here, end here, that was it. Well, now you got 2 things to think about. And I don't know how much experience you guys have doing client-server programming, or even just either concurrent programming or distributed programming, but there's just more things to think about. There's more things to sort of keep in your head. And so then if you find that you're sort of scratching your head, or wow, there's some things that you're really struggling with, don't be surprised, because this is something that is different from the first 3 projects, maybe different from the kinds of things that you've done so far in your software development careers. So the goal of this is to expose the behavior of your appointment book through a RESTful web service, a REST API. What I hope you get out of it is learning how to write a web application in Java, and then also work with HTTP-based network communication. I'm taking a step back. Do you guys know what HTTP is? It's the conversation protocol that is used for the web, right? Hypertext Transport Protocol. And so it's a standard that basically specifies how a data communication protocol between a client and a server. lots more details in the screencast. I do recommend that you check that screencast out before doing the homework. I think it's okay maybe for the first couple of projects if if you want to take more time to either focus on the project or get your information from other resources. For projects 4 and 5, I think it'll be more effective and efficient for you guys to take the hour and a half, however long it takes to watch the lectures and then work on your homework. Okay, so what are the requirements for this project? We'll go through the requirements and then I'll walk through the archetype, kind of like what I did on the first day for project for the student and for project 1. But now I'll focus on some of this new stuff that's here for project 4. Okay, so in your package, you're going to create a new class called an appointment book servlet. A servlet is an object that runs inside a web container that handles HTTP requests. So think of it as you start up your web server, and in it there is this object that you write that knows how to get information about an incoming HTTP request. So it's like, I hit a URL in a web browser, poof, my Java code gets executed. My Java code does something with the information provided in that URL, in the HTTP request, the URL, and there's headers and parameters and stuff like that, we'll see. And then generates a response based on that. And this servlet should handle a couple of URLs. The first one is, appointment book is the name. Well, so there's host and port. This is where this is the machine and the port that your web application your web container is running in. Appointment book is the name of the application. And then /appointments is the name of the endpoint, is the name of the servlet, I guess, or is the location of the servlet. And when it is given an owner equals name parameter, the following should happen. If you hit this URL using the get verb, then it returns all the appointments in the appointment book using the pretty printer. So you're going to reuse your pretty printer to send output not to standard out or to a file, but to back over the HTTP request, back to the HTTP response. If you hit that URL with a post verb, then that's used to create a new appointment based on the values in the request parameters owner, description, begin time, and end time. We'll work through examples and see how all of this stuff is communicated. Do you guys know what I mean when I talk about the verbs associated with HTTP? Yeah. So you guys have, I don't know, have you done, do you get to even write HTML? Has anybody done that? Anybody use forms? Okay, right. And so one of the things you can do with a form is that you can either get the URL, get the form, or post to the form. So the HTTP protocol, there's the URL, which is the location, and there are things like part of the URL can be the key value pairs that are passed along with that. But you can also, and so when you get a URL, you're basically asking the web server, hey, here's the URL, and what you do is return me the content at that URL. That can be an HTML page, can be an image, whatever it is. Just simply send that back to me. So it's kind of like a read-only operation, right? It's like go look up this resource. Pretend you're at a library. Remember those with books? Remember those? And you're like, oh great, I've got a Dewey Decimal Number. Remember that? And it's like, okay, I can go and find that. You're asking the librarian. You give them a book, and they can go find it and bring it back to you. Wow, that was an antiquated reference. My kids would have no idea what that means. Anyway, post is saying, well, here's an address. Here is a location on the internet of some resource. Put information there, update or make a change of some sort. So maybe it's you're adding a new book to the library, or you are, I want to change the title of a book. You guys don't really do that. Books are pretty static. Okay, my example is falling down now. But the whole idea is that there are different verbs. And so then there's also something called put, which has slightly different, which is similar to post, but has a little different semantics. There's delete, where it's hey, here's a resource, and you can delete it. You probably haven't dealt with that because web browsers don't delete stuff directly on the internet, but the protocol supports it. And so then a few years ago now, people really started leveraging the full power of the HTTP protocol to interact with the web. So instead of it being just sort of a read-only just by clicking on URLs and doing HTTP gets, or by using HTML forms to interact, they realized that, wow, there's a whole protocol out there that we can take advantage of. The web servers have always provided implementations of this stuff, but the applications it was a while before people realized their applications could take advantage of it. Anyway, slight digression, explained much better, I think, in the lectures. So one URL is for getting all appointments or for creating a new appointment. There is a new piece of functionality. Oops, that's cut off. A new piece of functionality that you need to add to your project 4, and that's the ability to query an appointment book. So when you hit the URL that's /appointments, and you give it the owner, the begin time, and an end time, that returns all of the appointment book's appointments that occurred between the start and end time. So you hit that URL with a get, and it will query your appointment book and return the appointments of interest. So that's what your web server does. It leverages a lot of the code that you've already written, right? Your appointment book. I don't think that needs to change. An appointment book might need to if you implement the query logic there. And you can also use your pretty printer. Note that, and I'll reiterate this again, I think later in a footnote or something, you won't be using your text dumper or your text parser. Actually, no, you might. Never mind, I take that back. You might be using it. What you won't be doing in this program is writing the file out anywhere. You notice that nowhere in here do we actually have like file name. That doesn't exist anymore. Not necessarily the best real world example, but I think one of the interesting things and one of the differences maybe between what you've been doing to date and Project 4 is that because the web server stays up the entire time, the data is persistent between different client calls. It's persistent in memory, so it's kind of volatile, but it is persistent between calls from the client. And speaking of the client, the other piece of functionality that you need to provide in this assignment is a Project 4. This is a client program. Well, this is a command line program just like Project 1, 2, and 3. However, instead of interacting with the file system, instead of interacting with the file system, it interacts with the server by using HTTP, by making requests of URLs and interpreting the output of those, the responses from those. So here's a command line program for that. The same 4 long-suffering arguments that are required. The options are a little different, though. So there's no text file. There's no pretty. Instead, what there is there's a dash host name and a dash port. So this tells the client, hey, here's the host name and port to connect to when creating your URLs. You can say dash search. I won't talk about exactly what that means in a little bit. You still have your dash print. And then, of course, you have your README. So the command line is a little bit different here. So here's just some notes. So you have to specify both a host and a port. If you just only specify one, that's an error. We're not going to worry about default hosts or default ports. Here are a couple examples of what the client can do. So when you want to add an appointment to the server, actually it's the same, it's the same arguments that you've always had. Oops, that's an error. This should be 2 command line arguments right there. But here you have your Project 4, and then you have your dash host and dash port. So that should look pretty familiar. Here's an example of searching for appointment between 2 times. And so here we have the the host and the port. You use dash search, and you have the owner, and then you have the begin time and the end time. And so then what this does is it'll parse the command line, and instead of invoking your appointment book directly, what it'll do is it will use some code, and there's some examples in the archetype that you can evolve to then call your to make calls to your web server. Okay, so the usual caveats about exiting gracefully. With errors, and now there are a whole suite of errors that you get to work with. So, of course, if your command line is messed up, format date timer wrong, or something bad happens while working with the server. Conceptually, it's it's kind of the same thing as if something bad happens with your file system. It's a lot more likely if there's something go wrong with your server because it's in a different process on a different machine, et cetera, et cetera. So before I go on and start diving into details, any any conceptual questions about what we're doing here, or any questions about the requirements? Yeah.
So with the search, are you counting
any appointment that overlaps that, or any appointment that's
Begin or after. Is it inclusive, exclusive? I don't remember. I don't say, apparently. Let me get the whole thing here. Oops, still not. I said between, so let's just say inclusive of the query parameters. I don't think I test with the extremes of the range, whether it's a date that's actually the same as the as one of the query parameters. So inclusive. Yes.
Will these be running on the same machine, or do you want us to actually run like the server on Ada and like attach via our client over the web?
Shouldn't make any difference.
Okay.
I'll spill the beans now. Yeah, I'm gonna test them all in the same system. I'm not gonna. But your program should not assume that. Okay. Yep.
So like there's a problem when something happens to the server, do you want us to output the exact, like, or you know, whatever that, or can we just do a generic one, there's a problem?
Let's see here. I'm trying to think. Is there? Well, you know. Okay. So the question was, if something happens, if something bad happens on the server, what should the client print out? So I would say that the client, just the same way that you shouldn't print a stack trace for an exception, it probably isn't very valuable to the end user to say the HTTP code. So like 404, it's like it's a command line program. No, I mean, it's just say, you know, can't find URL or whatever. That being said, your servlet, so your server-side code, should set the HTTP error status. So then if, you know, especially if there's like some internal exception, so it's like, oh, look, you know, there's a null pointer exception and I caught it, so return a 500 error code. And then, you know, depending on how ambitious you feel, I'm probably not going to test for it. Actually, I'm not going to test for it. If, I don't know, let's say the command, let's say the date that you pass in on the URL isn't well formed, well, there's a HTTP status code for that kind of thing. It's probably one of the 4 or 5 or something, with a bad input or something. So, you know, be creative. Or, you know, I encourage you to explore the wild world of HTTP error codes, and you know, and use one that seems appropriate. It's all part of learning. Okay, let's dive in. Okay. There is okay. So if you watch the lecture, I talk about all sorts of things like web containers and servlets and all of this stuff. These are new APIs. These are new things. It takes a little while to figure everything out. I've tried to make it easy for you, and easier or approachable by putting everything into a Maven archetype that creates a project that has all of the ability to create the web application, to start up a web container called Jetty, which is like a little web server. A web container or a servlet engine is a little web server that basically, it's a web server, so it supports HTTP, but then takes the HTTP requests and routes it to a Java object that the servlet object that you register as part of what's called a web application. And so then Maven supports all of this stuff, and so what we've got here is a web archetype that will set up all of that web application infrastructure for you. Will let you start up a Jetty web container, deploy your application into it, all sorts of good stuff. Oh yeah, and by the way, I also have, as we'll see, unit tests for your code and integration tests, so you can actually write automated tests that will start up the web application, run your command line program to hit it. So you know, some of that's kind of new, and I'm pretty sure it works. I haven't had a class kick the tires on it yet, so let me know if there's something wonky going on for you. But and there should be a backslash right there. But anyway, so and also probably what we're doing for the next half an hour at least is walking through all of that stuff. So let's go ahead and do this. Oops! Oh, come on. PDF. Seriously? Come on, go away. There you go. Okay. So, let's start something new. Okay, so this big command line here will create a new Maven project that from the appointment book web archetype. As long as I've got my login ID. Okay, so it's just confirming I want to be, that artifact ID appointment book. You know what? I don't want to call it appointment book. I think that one I'll take. No. Stop. I want to call it appointment book -web. Yours should be called appointment book. Because I think I already have an appointment book project here. I do. So I'm going to call mine -web. Yours should still be appointment book. It might not matter too much. We'll see. Okay. Cool. So now I've got an appointment book web with a POM and a source, a target, all sorts of cool stuff. Okay. So let's go back to the assignment. Okay. So that creates that. Rename the directory they created for project 1. Maybe I should do that instead. Yeah, we'll see. It might mess me up. So, do what I say. Do as I say, not as I do. Oof. Okay. So,
If you rename that directory, does that automatically update the the original product?
it
If you refactor it in something like,
yeah.
the ID,
I want to do this right. So I'm going to do what I said I should do, and get version control. Oops, version control synchronize. Revert this dude. Okay, so yeah, I want to change the name of my appointment book. To, let's see here, can I rename this? Maybe. Rename module. And I want to call it appointment book command line. Oh, interesting, that did not do what I wanted it to do. Okay, so now I want to rename the directory, I guess. Appointment book command line, and then I'll have to do all sorts of other stuff. But since you have to do it too, what did it do? It moved the directory. It changed the POM XML. It probably changed everything because everything moved. Yeah. Okay. So now, what happens if I try to run everything? Should it rename? Let me see what it did. This is still called appointment book, which I don't want. Command line. And now I want to look up in the parent. And then I want the child to be appointment book. Command line. Let's see if this works. That looked okay. Let's see here. The artifact ID is command line. I think that's okay. Where else is that used? Nope. Okay, so that might work out. Okay. Well, I thought it was all right. So maybe it's not as bad as I thought. So rename the original appointment book Maven project to appointment book. Command line.
So now you're gonna create this new
or basically this new appointment book, a whole new project,
Mhm.
and we're just going to import any of the classes that we wrote from the last one.
So, what do you do with your classes? You'll need to copy them over.
Just put them in the copy them in the
Copy them. Yeah. We'll see that there is a source directory for the web application, just like there was for your command line application. Copy them over.
Starting afresh, just tweak some.
Yeah. Right. I mean, everything. Well, the package is the same. Package is the same. It's just the location is different, and you'll need to add some new functionality. But one of the things I hope you get out of this assignment is like, look, I can use all that stuff from the first 3 projects here. I only need to change a little. I only need to augment it to do new functionality. I don't need to start over from scratch just to use stuff in a web application. So it's all Java. Okay. Okay. Oops. Archetype. Okay. So I do. That needs to be web, but this I don't want to be web. Okay. That's what I want. Okay, it's happy again. I think. Yes. Okay. Appointment book command line. Okay, let's see what IntelliJ says. Oh yeah, unversion files. 11. Okay, so got all sorts of good stuff. Okay, so I will let's cd into this and do a Maven Clean verify. So I just want to make sure that everything builds out of the gate here, and I will explain all this that's going on in the next little bit. So these are the integration tests, doing things like starting web servers and stuff. Everything's going to be passing. That's good, so I'll commit it. I will add, let's see here, I probably want to add all those unversion files. Yeah. Oops. Appointment book. Add to VCS. Okay. And I'll say added Maven application for the appointment book web, Maven project for appointment book web application. Okay. Got everything checked in, nice clean slate. Now it's time to start doing stuff. Okay.
You did add the POM to what you're as part of the project. I mean, did you generally commit that version, right?
Oh, definitely the POM.
Definitely.
Yep. Actually, one of the nice things about a POM, as opposed to an Eclipse.class path or IntelliJ IML files and stuff like that, is that it's designed to be sort of independent of the environment. So it's portable, meaning that I can you can check out my POM and that it'll work in your environment, as opposed to some schools of thought where it's you check in your IDE configuration files, and I don't think that works very well, going from environment to environment. So unless the IDE is very careful about it. So that's one of the things I like about Maven. And it also means that anybody who uses your project has to use that same IDE, and that's not nice. Okay, so we just created a new Maven project. Now we can play around with it for a little bit. Let's see here. Okay, so oh, and you know what? I'm gonna have two windows going here. Okay, so here's one over here. Okay, so in this window, I'm going to run Jetty. Now, Jetty is a web container. So this there's a Maven plugin that knows how to go and download the Jetty web server, and you can configure which port it runs on, all sorts of other stuff like that. And it will start up the web application, the web server, the web container. It will build your web application, deploy your web application to the web server, and then it'll serve it up. So if I then in a URL hit localhost 8080/appointment book, I get a default index.html. So this is actually one of my project files, appointment book. I want to synchronize all this stuff. And that is, it's okay. And so the Maven has, we've seen main Java. For web apps, there's main web app, which has a couple of things. Here is index.html, and here is some 1994 style HTML. Don't judge. Don't judge. That basically lets you interact with your servlet using using HTML forms. The archetype creates comes with a simple web application. By I mean simple, what it does is you post key value pairs to the servlet. So just like A equals B, B equals C, and then lets you query it back and forth, and you interact with it with this page. So I can say, okay, list all key value pairs. I can click it here. It then goes to the URL, appointments. It goes to the appointments URL, and when it hits the appointments URL, it says, okay, contains 0 key value pairs. I'm going to go back to my browser. I can add a key value pair, like A1. I click this. This makes a post to a certain URL, actually to this URL, and that maps A to 1. I'll make another one. I'll say B to 2. Post it. It said map B to 2, and now when I list all of them, I get, well, A is 1 and B is 2. This content is generated by the web server in that Java servlet. We'll look at that in a little bit. And it's what happens when you hit this URL. As a matter of fact, I can hit it in other ways. I can hit it from the command line. So I can say wget -o-. I can hit that same URL. Oops, no way, really? Curl. I think you can just do that. Oh, is there a dash quiet? Nope. Okay. So I hit it from the command line, and see, I get the same thing. Okay, because it's hitting the web server that's running right here in this process.
And 8080 is the port.
8080 is the port, right? So. When you open up a socket in a program, you say what port, right? It's a conceptual hole in the back of your machine, and it's got these numbers. So imagine that there's all of these like holes, and you can say, hey, I'm listening on this particular number, and so anybody who wants to talk to me, make a request that for this host's machine on that port, and when the request comes to the machine, the operating system says, oh, this is for port 8080. Okay, I'll deliver this payload that came in from the internet to that process. Right? I am of a certain age where this is what like computers were, and so this is like very intuitive to me. You guys, though, while you might have been using computers, like since you were using the internet, actually not just computers, the internet, networking, network's always been there. For me, it was something that we sort of like, it was there, and then like everybody started using it, and so like I had to learn all this. When I say things like ports and hosts and local hosts, does that like make sense to you? Are those familiar terms? Okay, let me know if they're not, though. Because one of the things that I've found is that, yeah, even though like everybody uses the web and everybody types in URLs and things like that, unless you've like taken a networking course or like you're just generally interested in it, you probably haven't been taught really what it means or how it's implemented and sort of all the magic behind the machine. Even though some of you might have been attracted to the field because of all the magic and you want to learn more about it, here's an opportunity to play with some of it. So let me, I guess I'm saying, as usual, let me know if I'm going too fast or if there are things that you want to explore further.
So our local host in this case is which some server on, are we, is it the local host in terms of like some, the server is our servlet?
Local host is a special name for the current machine, right? So it's a loopback address, well, I don't know exactly loopback address, but it's basically saying, hey, it's yourself. Just the same way that, I can say, right, I can say web.cecs.pdx.edu. I can do that, and this is this. So that's the domain name, the location of that machine.
And then so our servlet is listening on this particular.
Yes. So when I started up,
the multiple ports and the various things that they're kind of allocated or cordoned off for this one's schema.
Yes, it's listed on 8080. As a matter of fact, in our pom.xml for this project.
And you can tweak that as. Can you just tweak it in the POM like that,
Yep.
or is it?
In this project, you can.
Okay.
So, like when you start up Jetty, you need to tell it. It's got a default port. It probably default. Well, does default to 8080 or does default port to 80?
Does it
I can't-
know something about the machine or the operating system determines which port? Like this, it's a universal kind of part of the protocol.
Well, the protocols, protocols. Most networking protocols will define a default port, right? So, like when you go to Google, you don't say http://www.google.com:80 because it defaults to 80, and so then the request the web browser actually makes under the covers is it sends out 80, but because it's the default, the web browser tacks on the 80 and then makes the call for you. And the same way, SMTP and all the other things like that have default ports. However, the default ports are in the lower, usually usually less than 1024. They're restricted on many operating systems, and so unless you have elevated privileges, you can't run on it. So, like for instance, if you tried to, I'd assume that if you tried to start a web browser on like Ada or one of the Linux machines or whatever, it wouldn't let you. Maybe it would. And so then you have to specify a non-default port. So 8080 is sort of the conventional one that's used for Java servlet web containers. Okay, lots of questions. Yes.
How did you get this? How did you get it? What was the Java-jar to get this started? Because I tried running it and saying my connection refused.
There is no Java-jar. So what I did, I'll just actually I don't want to quite do it yet. I will scroll up way up here to the top. I ran the Maven Jetty run command. So that runs the server. So that's the server side. We haven't quite gotten to the client side yet, but we will in just a second. Okay, so that's running the server. And so yeah, when I hit it like in my web browser, it returns. So when I hit this like default URL, it redirects. It doesn't redirect. It serves up the index.html file. But then when I hit when I hit a different URL like /appointments $key = A, it spits out this stuff. So this is me, this is me hitting a web server. It's nothing that special. Anyway, another question over here? Someone? Do you have a question? No. Okay. Okay. So I have this web server and it's running on port 8080. And I can do things with it through a web page, right? So this is really nothing magical here. It's a web page, and what I'm doing is I'm using these HTML forms to get and post from a URL. And as you saw over here, we could use the curl utility. And so curl is a Unix command line utility where I think it's called CURL, because you give it a URL and it makes a GET request by default, and it returns the content. So here, when I hit this same URL, right? When I hit this URL from curl, I get the same output that I do in the browser. It's just hitting that same URL. It's a GET. It's not doing anything special. Okay. I also have a command line Java program. Oops. Pointbook.jar. That is a Java program that will interact with my web server using HTTP. So the host name is localhost. The port is 8080. And if I give it no key in value, it hits that same URL and spits the output back. So I have 3 different ways of interacting with my servlet. And I guess the nice thing about this is that the web application doesn't care. It doesn't care what the client is. It doesn't care if I'm hitting it through a web browser. It doesn't care if I'm using curl. It doesn't care if I'm using a Java program. All it knows is that I take an HTTP request, I figure out that request, I do something with it, and I return back some output. It doesn't care. So anyway, that's kind of cool. Okay, So let's see here. I think these are like the big pieces parts. And so then, like for your project, what you're going to do is take the web application, evolve it to use your stuff to implement the behavior that's described in the assignment. So for instance, these URLs here, right? And we'll see in a little bit. Probably, let's see here. I'll go a little bit further before taking a break. Or maybe I should take a break. Anyway, it'll implement these URLs, and then you'll need to take the project 4 main class and then augment it to not only parse this command line, but then also interact with these URLs, not the one that's currently implemented. Okay. I think this is a good stopping point for right now. Let's take 10, and we'll be back here a little bit before 7 o'clock.